Commissioners, any other comments about our minutes from our last meeting? Okay, then I'd go ahead and entertain a motion to potentially
Motion to approve.
approve the minutes with corrections, perhaps?
With corrections.
Okay, I have a motion from Commissioner McDowell. Do I have a second? Vaughn seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Motion passes unanimously. And our next item is a public hearing around amending our housing element. So this is, so that we have two, just FYI, we have two distinct topics tonight. We're going to go over, we have a workshop, which is coming later, about our objective design standards. And at first, we're going to have the public hearing, which is not a workshop, but a proper public hearing around our housing element amendment. So, Jeff, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair Findling. So to start off, I'll remind you that the recommended motion tonight would be to recommend City Council amend the 2023-31 housing element to permit multifamily housing by right in R3, C1, and C2 zones, subject to ministerial review by the Planning Commission for compliance with objective design standards. So that's a mouthful, but that's your recommended motion. As you recall, 60 days ago, we were here, we took a straw poll vote to test Commission's resolve on this subject. You directed staff to prepare the staff report and resolution before you, recommending that that recommendation that I just read move forward to council. Should you approve or agree with staff's recommendation, concurring with your previous vote to move this forward quickly, we will move this quickly to City Council. They are the ultimate regulating authority, so that they will take your consideration or take into consideration your recommendation and act on it next month. I want to point out, this is a quick overview of the staff report for everybody watching the live view. Please keep in mind that this action tonight does not change the municipal code. It does not change the housing element. It merely recommends that we move forward with changes subsequent to tonight's hearing. Again, Planning Commission recommending the housing element be sent back to the State Housing and Community Development for a review again for certification. If they agree with these changes, we will get a certification letter from them within 60 days of submission. After that, the housing element will officially be amended, and after that amendment, we will initiate compliance with the programs herein, particularly the programs cited in my staff report and in the resolution, 2.3.4, which does mandate that the municipal code be changed within 1 year of adoption, so the clock is already ticking, to allow that housing by right subject to the objective design standards. So there's a process before us which will engage with the public, which will likely last up to a year, realistically, to consider iterations of not only the amendment to the municipal code, but the objective design standards, which are the next item on the agenda, which we hope to get into quickly. So with that, I'm going to pause, let you deliberate if needed. If there is no deliberation, we look forward to a motion and a vote.
And a public hearing.
That's correct, yes.
So commissioners, comments, questions for staff? Toussaint, you want to start?
Just to reiterate, this is not us approving the objective design standards as they're written right now.
Correct. They are appended here to the staff report for context only, so you get a sense that, and having been part of the subcommittee, you get a sense that these objective design standards are fairly robust. They capture a lot of the intent of the existing design guidelines, a lot of the intent of various chapters within our municipal code, and that the action that you take on by right housing permission is subject to those robust set of standards, which, again, are here for context only. You're taking no action on them tonight. Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else?
That's it for now.
Okay, thanks, Tucson. Vaughn? You good for now? David?
So this is moving what our first motion was at the last meeting to amend it to say all multifamily housing, just sending it to city council for their approval to send it to HCD.
Correct.
Okay. Just trying to wrap my head around it.
There you go. Anything else?
Nope.
And that was at the request of HCD, right?
Yes.
Okay. Patty? Are we good? Okay, then, if anyone from the public would like to come and give us their 2 cents on this part, which is the housing element piece, not the objective design standards, we'll have lots of time for that in a moment, you're welcome to come up to the microphone.
So you are in effect opening the public hearing.
I am opening the public hearing. So,
I apologize, I thought it was the next item number.
no, that's, you know what, it's not clear to everybody. This
'Cause
is,
Yeah, what we're talking, I'm here, hi, thanks, Jeff.
Hey.
Having
so,
us.
and please introduce yourself.
I am Shane McClellan. I'm 42 years old. I've lived in Siskiyou County since 2001. I live in Mount Shasta Forest, and I own a tiny house company where I build tiny houses on the old McLeod mill site. But more specifically, the reason that I'm here is to talk to you about a nonprofit committee that we are forming that is directly related to a lot of the changes that you guys are actively seeking right now. And sorry about that. And so we're called the Siskiyou Housing Alliance, or I should say that we will be called the Siskiyou Housing Alliance. And our mission statement is approaching solutions for sustainable housing in Siskiyou County. That kind of dovetails directly in with what you're all trying to do. And our specific ask is more of an alternative housing approach as it pertains to tiny houses, ADUs, and the exemptions for grandmother-in-law units that California has recently passed. And we're pursuing community land trust models as well to help incorporate and fend off against gentrification and things like this, what's happening in Tahoe and Bay Area, where I'm originally from, where workforce housing is completely priced out of the spectrum, and then we're left with the conundrum of standard conventional housing, which I'm not here to knock. I'm just saying that in addition to that, tiny houses are a way and ADUs are a way to propel us into housing security for our workforce. And we also have under our vision and goals to utilize eco-friendly building materials and principles as much as possible, and to further community life by encouraging and creating cooperative measures for land use and nature. And so there's really a nature approach to enjoying what we have here in beautiful southern Siskiyou and the greater Mount Shasta. And we're really just starting the dialogue as to where we can team in with those things. And we really appreciate any and all help and anything that we can do also to assist and help you and the greater community.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Evan Drake. I'm a builder in Mount Shasta. I was just going to comment on the CLT, the Community Land Trust element that Shane just mentioned. We're interested in exploring community-based development versus private development. And the Community Land Trust model is uniquely conducive to that. Am I allowed to ask questions or like for consensus during this, or?
Well, this is more of a traditional public hearing. We will have more back and forth later, and I think
Yeah.
we will be, checking in with staff about.
Sure. I'll just go ahead
capability.
with the.
Go ahead and explain.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
So a community land trust, if you don't know, is a nonprofit organization that holds the deed to land for benefit of community members. specifically residentially, but also for businesses. The nonprofit is, the board of the nonprofit is people living in the community, whether they're like local professionals, they actually live on the project, or people like you involved in local government. So the board is kind of a tripart amalgam of people to diversify the interests and make sure that the land trust is functioning for the best of the complete community. The land trust nonprofit owns the land, but not the houses on the land. It leases the plots to individuals and families who own houses on the land, but it itself does not own the structures on the land. And that's the kind of the key differentiation of the CLT model. It also deed restricts resale on the property, well, not the property, but the houses, generally, and says that it can't be resold for more than purchase value plus inflation plus improvements. And so in that way, it tries to preserve affordability long term. It's a fairly time-tested model. There have been CLTs in the USA for about 60 years, and most of them are still going strong. There's a lot of vetted examples and also a lot of grants and funding for starting these organizations. So we're looking at it as an alternative to private development, not a replacement necessarily, but certainly something that can create a more community-based housing initiative in Mount Shasta and preserve affordability and keep families here and allow for home ownership for people who otherwise would be renting probably for the rest of their lives. So that is the CLT in a nutshell, and that's one of the avenues that we're exploring.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Cindy Lee Cohn, and I've been living in Mount Shasta since 1992. I actually have Q&A, so I think I'll be happening at the end. Is that correct? For interaction?
For the design standards, yeah. If you're going to help us with the design standards, that would be lovely.
Yes, that's what I came to do, but I wanted to just make sure that I'm in the right spot.
Okay,
thank you.
great, thank you. Okay, for those who are watching, there's no one else here, so I'm going to close the public hearing and take it back to commissioners. We'll start over here. Do you have more thoughts, things we wanted to discuss? Patty, we'll start with you. No? David?
Nope, I'm good.
Vaughn? No. Tucson? Okay, well, I do. So in light of this tiny home, the Community Land Trust, Jeff, do we have a mechanism within our housing element that would, and then changes to municipal code that would support this kind of a project? And do we have any obstacles in the way, in what we're working on right now, any obstacles to development of this kind of a project?
No, the only, I have dealt in a previous jurisdiction with CLT formation and ensuring that municipal code amendments, particularly those related to design, are receptive to the classic and typical pro forma and the development pro forma and design typology that is offered by the community. So we would want to make sure moving forward that the objective design standards are receptive to that degree of, or that type of development. So that's a pin item to remember for sure. Off on its face, I can't think of anything in the ODS architectural forms that we'd need to pay particular attention to, but let's get to that when we get there. As for your housing element, the first item, there is nothing to be concerned with respect to CLT. It's a code, it's a municipal code relevance, not a housing element relevance at this point.
Okay, and then, but we will make changes to the code, getting rid of a CUP, so getting rid of the CUP also could potentially make it easier for this kind of development?
Precisely, yeah, this and all other housing that is multifamily and not already exempt from design review.
Lovely, okay, thank you. I don't have anything else, then if we're commissioners, we have a motion then?
I just.
Or do you, oh, go
I
ahead.
have a question, not a.
Oh, by all means.
Totally off subject. Are we done with Zoom call-ins?
Yes.
Okay, it just wasn't. We didn't ask for them, so I didn't know if we were missing something.
Which is why we didn't meet last time, because we didn't notice that we weren't having Zoom calls, which is why it was postponed to tonight.
Gotcha, okay.
Okay, so back to our agenda item. Are we ready for a motion? To recommended motion? Are we ready to approve staff's recommendation? Commissioners, do we have more questions or disapprove?
Thinking. I'd like to raise the motion to approve.
Okay, using the staff's recommended motion?
That's exactly right.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second.
And Tucson seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No opposition. The motion passes unanimously to approve the housing element amendment. So now, we're on to item number 6, which is our objective design standards workshop. And so hopefully everybody has had a chance to look at what we're hoping to get input on what we want Mount Shasta's streetscape to look like. And this is an opportunity to weigh in, and I am looking forward to participation. Go ahead and set the tone for us there. Explain it, please, Jeff.
Yeah, so let's take a half a step back and talk about where we came from first. So about 7 months ago, Planning Commission recommended that we move forward with establishing an objective design standards subcommittee. Commissioner McDowell, Finling, and Sarian were on that subcommittee. We met half a dozen times or so, reported back to Planning Commission as to progress. We made various iterations of the document, starting from, if you will, mining the existing design provisions throughout the municipal code to co-locate them in one chapter, which is now 1850, and in its public review draft form attached to your packet this evening. It is on packet page 34, and it is, again, a consolidation of many different chapters of the municipal code. There are different divisions within it to reflect that co-location of code, from site configurations and considerations, starting with fencing and landscaping and parking locations, building location on sites. Once you get through that as a designer, let's say affordable housing developer or multifamily housing developer comes forward with the project, they work through the document front to back, they get through the site design standards, and then it gets into the architectural typology sections. That takes us into a series of different, what are standardly called housing prototypes. If they want to build, for example, a triplex or a duplex, there's a section for that. If they want to build a courtyard apartment, there's a section for that. If they want to build stacked apartments, there's a section for that. If it's a Main Street building, there's a section for that, and so on. So what staff have tried to do, and what the subcommittee has done, is ensure that we have gone far enough that we are regulating with those clear and objective standards, mass, scale, and to some degree architectural form, without going so far that we are controlling the architectural character. The logic being that we want to encourage creativity, innovation in the expression of architecture in this community. We do, as a caveat, include on the very front end of that character discussion a purpose and statement which alludes to what we have called in our previous architectural guidelines our Mountain Village theme. We discussed at length the point or the effort surrounding and the consequences of trying to articulate what that Mountain Village theme is in objective standards. So essentially saying, here's a cookie cutter Mountain Village theme expression of architecture. developer, you need to comply with this cookie cutter and all the mass scale form provisions in the code. The subcommittee felt that was just a little bit too far. We wanted to, well, if we went that far, we would constrain creativity and innovation in architecture. We pulled back from that. We left the Mountain Village theme in as aspirational only. It's articulated as all-weather protection in a few different subsections. And ultimately, I think having worked through aspirational language in design standards previously, I can tell you that most developers are encouraged by that conversation, or to have that conversation at the early end of a project. So large projects, for example, would come through in compliance with our existing code provisions for a pre-application conference. We would introduce the objective design standards, and we would give them opportunity to engage, to walk through hand in hand the contents of these standards, how they apply, and it would be their designer's turn to integrate this, their design into the mold, if you will, and bring forth a project. As it's written, that project would be brought forth back to staff. We would generate a recommendation in the form of a staff report, much like the one we've presented this evening. We would have a recommendation that the project either meets or does not meet the objective design standards. So it's a binary, non-discretionary decision to make. That either comply with these objective standards or they do not. And it's essentially an on-balance conclusion. There are many dozens of different standards within our public review draft. It's very likely that a developer could come along and meet 2/3 of them, but not all of them. Well, in that case, they would get a recommendation, or they would get no recommendation, or a recommendation of denial, and they would come before the Planning Commission. And Planning Commission's role as the regulatory body would be to review staff's recommendation of either no decision or denial. In the case of a no decision, you would deliberate much as you are now, and the developer would be here in a collaborative form and say, developer, would you be willing to meet the rest of these standards? If so, produce the record, go back to your drawing board, produce this material, submit it to staff, and hopefully get a different recommendation at next month's meeting. That's more of a collaborative result of these standards. The denial approach is not uncommon. A developer would say, we choose to go forward to Planning Commission not meeting a half a dozen standards. We want to see what the Planning Commission has to say. The Planning Commission would review objectively, without discretion, whether or not the standards that they have not met rise to a level of denial. And if should be clear and evident, in that case, Planning Commission, it's different than a discretionary process. There is very little, if any, room for discretionary dialogue or debate or horse trading in the hearing. That needs to be very, very clear. So there's a little bit of coaching and practice perhaps at that juncture, and staff will provide that to you. Regardless, that is due process. They get a denial recommendation to present to, in our case, Planning Commission. If it were a subset of this commission, let's say, for example, a design review commission, they would get the same due process. The same process would unfold if, for example, you had agreed to establish the regulatory authority at a staff level. We would do the same thing. We would say, listen, you've met 2/3 of these standards. You need to meet all of them. Objective standards are clear. Go back to the drawing board. So there is a little bit of iteration, but I want to underscore the importance of being objective and non-discretionary when it comes to these standards. That's the importance of these standards as we discuss them over the forthcoming months. And finally, before I turn it over to questions, in the case of a recommended approval, same applies. We would come forward at a staff level with the checklist of objective standards. It would be in a checklist format, would be a very simple staff report, more tabular in form than anything else, not a lot of narrative, not a lot of findings that are embedded within the discretionary 1860, our existing architectural review chapter. So it'd be far more simplified. I want to point out too that before this project, or let's say a hypothetical project, can be reviewed for objective design standards, it still has to be a code compliant project. It still has to comply with all other chapters of the Mount Shasta General Plan and the Municipal Code. Otherwise, it does not move forward. There's lots of compliance mandates within those documents that require that things like stormwater be resolved, endangered species be resolved. There are fire hardening and building code compliance issues to talk about. So even though it's a design review, design review entitlement, there's lots of other municipal code and general plan compliance that is required even at this early juncture. So don't think for a minute that we're not going to be able to require that the documents you are reviewing are code compliant to begin with. And that would be, in that case, we would come forward with a recommendation of approval. You would review staff's recommendation of approval and act accordingly. And that's the end of that. I was hoping that we could have, again, some engagement, maybe walking through the format of the document. If you want to do a deep dive on any sections or subsections, let's feel free to do that. I want to make sure that we allow the public time to engage, to provide comments to either me or you as a body. And depending on our comfort level at the end of this hearing and in the coming weeks, we can decide whether or not that next month's public hearing is indeed a public hearing with a recommendation, or if we do one more of these events and continue the conversation. So that's all I'll have to say. Turn it over to you.
Okay, commissioners, maybe let's sort through commission comments and questions before we open up the workshop piece. So we'll start over here. Patty, are you good? David?
Jeff, do you have another one of the packets?
Yeah.
I just had the cover pages in my.
Oh, this is last month's.
Was that last month's?
That's what yeah. Did you have any questions to start off?
I got to remember some of the, if I remember right, it was the glazing requirements on some of the frontages seemed excessive. But I can't remember where I found it.
Was it like the front facade or something?
Yeah, windows, ground floor windows must cover 40% of the ground floor wall area.
Right.
That seems excessive to me, but I haven't done the shorthand math to.
And where did we get that number, if we're going to dive in? And we'll let everybody chime in on all of this. It's coming, don't worry. Jeff, do you recall where we got the number?
To be clear, you're talking about section 3
Pretty much windows on all of them.
Yeah,
is
windows
40%.
in all. So this comes from precedent, a code. For one, it is a common glazing percentage. I researched, and in my past professional experience with similar building type and form, that this would be an applicable standard to start the conversation. Again, the context is comparable. Calistoga, California, for example, similar mass scale form, cottage industry, if you will, as an architectural form. The glazing tends to go up. The more percentage of glazing tends to go up with the more vertical the housing. So in our Main Street building typology, the number is, I think, 60, as I recall. But for
Yeah, I think most of it's 40, I think you're, yeah, 60 there.
windows, ground floor windows in 11.9, the Main Street typology are 60,
60.
and then everywhere else they're 40. But it's a starting point for conversation, so we can certainly have that.
Is there an energy piece, depending on? maybe
Energy
you could
code's
weigh in.
required regardless, and that's a really good example because of the,
We're talking heat loss counts?
yes, so you can do a prescriptive path to energy code compliance. There's two paths. One, comply with standards, period, or demonstrate that comprehensively you're creating a more expensive building shell and you can get away with more glazing. That's so that your ultimate, the skin of your building holds the heat and the cooling to a degree that windows become a part of that conversation, not the entire conversation. So you can glaze more or less. I do believe that if an affordable housing project came in with density bonus housing request, that you would likely get more requests on this to concede or to waive pursuant to density bonus housing law. And this again would be, as is specified and discussed in the administrative chapter or subsection of this chapter, and it would be part of staff report recommendation that you've got an affordable housing that is subject to density bonus housing law, and they are seeking, these handful of concessions and waivers to meet the density bonus, and they have to make an argument. There's a little bit of state law pushback on that, but mind you, staff would request that they make a fair argument about why or how they're justifying those concession requests. And we would present them to you. And ground floor windows could very well be one of those.
But that would only be on deed-restricted projects. On market rate projects, we would have this number, and that would be a yes, no
Right,
minimum.
right.
So, but if it was on the north-facing versus south-facing side of a building, I don't know, Tucson, does that?
That affects Title 24.
Right. And so, is this, so in your,
It just seems, if you have a 20-foot home front, you need two 6050 windows on it. You have a 20-foot of wall, you need
and that seems like,
12 feet of windows plus a front door. It just seems like a lot of glazing on a face of a building.
on the north side of a house that's,
It's any
or even on
any
the south side
just
with
the street-facing
blasting
side.
sun. Yeah.
Because I don't. That fly.
All right, well, so,
It seemed like an excessive amount of glazing. I don't.
so that's a number to think about. Decreasing.
Yeah, so let's work that a little more. Do you want to direct staff to further refine or analyze
I think
that? What do you think?
some simple visuals on
Okay.
what that looks like on a, 1-story, 2, 3-story
Could we make
base.
that a max versus a minimum, for example?
I don't know about that. I mean, aren't we saying this, we're asking for a minimum of this percent
Right, I
glazing?
know.
And I don't know that, if it was some cool building that had all glass walls, would we say no? I don't think a max,
Okay,
I think we want to not just look at a wall
That's
of
a good point.
T111.
I like glass, but I'm just,
So what would that number be if this is too much? Maybe,
Well, we could break it apart and look again, back to, I think, Tucson's question or prompt is, show us some examples. We could, and then, as you know, ultimately, this final document will have locally relevant imagery and photographs to the extent we can find good examples or aspirational examples for each typology here. And so we would have those examples. And I think this might be a good example or section where we would have photos showing.
I'm just wondering if that may be the problem solved through the heat loss calcs. So in other words, if the stats aren't gonna meet the minimum requirement,
Right.
that's gonna That's already gonna change that.
But isn't it somewhat a function of the kind of glazing they use?
Yeah, it could be like triple pane,
Right, but we're
Yeah,
looking
stained glass,
strictly
that
at
kind of thing.
design,
right?
and they have to meet energy calcs.
Right. So to Vaughn's point, you're really, you will, glazing is expensive. It's one of the most expensive parts of the building shell. So you will see concessions sought for deed restricted on this number, almost guaranteed. For market rate housing, you probably, you couldn't, correct? So whatever this number is. Now, the point is, if we find conflicts in whatever Title 15 becomes in the next triennial, so every 3 years, the building code gets changed, and we're coming up on that in 2 years. So if that gets changed and we've got more prescriptive or restrictive energy code that competes with this, then guess what wins? You know, building code's gonna prevail, and then you're gonna see a staff report that doesn't have this box checked, but has the finding of overriding considerations because building code prevails. So it's a little fluid, and these numbers are more or less meaningful as a consequence of that, the fluidity of our different code cycles.
Okay, so it sounds like we will want to talk about this again.
Yep, I'll make a note to bring some examples to show what, and again, buildability, constructability, and development viability is our primary driver here. We really want to make sure that these numbers are something that, particularly with modular construction, factory built housing, which is the most affordable vehicle to deliver housing these days, that we're not creating an envelope within which you can't deliver affordable housing. That would be contrary to our fundamental intent here. So we need to be careful with some of these really prescriptive numbers. And that's not lost on staff.
That was it.
Does it? Hey, okay, Vaughn.
Okay, so my question is kind of like help the public understand. What are the biggest contrasts between what we've been doing and what we're proposing?
Well, as you recall, I did an attachment to, I tried to make an attachment to every staff report you've seen on this topic for the last 6 months or so, but it's a single page tabular depiction of all of our sections of municipal code that have architectural design related relevance and site design related relevance. 95% of this document, of these objective design standards, are mined from those codes. So for example, snow storage, that's one that was located in one part of the municipal code. Fencing was in another. Landscaping was kind of in some standards under water efficient landscaping. So we're pulling this all together. Very little of it, except for some of the mass scale form dimensions, which break facades into bits, is really new material.
Okay, so where I'm going with some of this is I can foresee where there might be litigation if somebody wants to build something a certain way and we're going, it's not fitting into this thing that somebody might think is subjective, which it can be. How do we kind of head that off?
In the context of an affordable housing project that is deed restricted subject to density bonus housing law, then we have little choice. That's not to say we have no choice. Little choice still gives us some choice around which waivers and concessions and incentives to deliver a density bonus project. Our staff will engage with that kind of dialogue, that back and forth. It's collaborative at its best. And if that is the culture and context of that initial review, then it will continue through the process. So I don't think you're going to get legal challenges because that's not the culture of this staff member and this commission. We are receptive to being innovative and creative and receptive to innovative housing typologies. That's the point here.
And that's why I was asking, because I'd like to make sure that whatever, not at any cost, but that we are sensitive to, first of all, I mean, it's no small secret here that we've lost population here in town. It would be a good idea to start thinking about building, the town responsibly, and to keep us from being static. And the idea is if you have contractors, I'd rather not be at odds with contractors who are reasonably trying to figure something out, but I don't want somebody, I don't care if somebody wants to name me in a lawsuit, go for it. But the idea is I'm just thinking ahead of what are the potential problems of these changes that we're making.
I think in a market rate context, it is, litigation happens, outside of our control. It depends on who brings the project to market, but I can tell you that in my experience, the affordable housing marketplace is far more litigious than is the market rate projects. They recognize that if they're not bringing an affordable housing component in their project to a local jurisdiction, they've got very little discretion to modify standards, particularly in California right now.
Okay. I appreciate, I'm just trying to make it simpler for everybody to understand what we're really trying to do, because you can get lost, in all the detail. And so that's the purpose of my questions.
Anything else?
Nope.
For now, Tucson.
Going back to what you were talking about at the beginning.
Get your mic there.
Let's say there was a market rate project coming and went through the ministerial review, and they didn't meet a few of the standards. They would come to the planning commission. Would the planning commission have the ability to look at the project and say possibly that it looks fine, just depending on the site where it's being built and the way that the building is presented, even if it's not totally to our standards? Does the planning commission have the ability to say, looks good, you can go ahead?
Within the exceptions provision of this chapter, we could make that clear. I would warn commission that there's a different synapse that kicks in when you're reviewing a project objectively than when you're reviewing one subjectively, because we have a definitional standard which by its legal definition is either met or it is not. And so if a market rate project were to come in saying, we want to go above and beyond, we want to make a better project than your standards allow, do you think Planning Commission would support this? If they meet those objective design standards clearly, objectively, then the answer is already, it's a foregone conclusion. The answer would be absolutely yes. If they're asking for concessions, then again, the staff would make that recommendation or not, and that is the recommendation to approve or not, or deny, and move forward, and you would have a chance, this body would have a chance to have that conversation on the record. Again, moving objective design standards around a little bit, that's permissible within a ministerial review. I'm speculating still, because this is still fluid statutory landscape for us all. I know that most ministerial review processes are contained at a subcommittee and below level, not a full planning commission level, even in mid to small communities. So you've made it clear that you want the planning commission to be the ultimate review body, and so when you get this before you, we'll all need to be kind of, if you will, reality checked along the way to make sure that we are using objective standards and not subjective interpretation.
Are projects still allowed to subjectively be approved? To where they don't go through the objective design review?
There are projects, we do have single-family homes. This does capture more than our current Chapter 1860 Architectural Review chapter does. As you recall, we lowered that review bar to capture duplexes and triplexes. We currently don't do that. So you will have less, if you will, exemption. You can go straight to building permit without any eyeballs on it from a design standpoint right now. Whereas in the future, under these standards, staff will be having a look at it. And under the way this is written currently, we have no thresholds within this to keep it at a staff level, let's say for a duplex or a triplex. It all goes to you.
But if somebody wants to take the long road instead of the short road, per se, to get their building permit, do they have the option to go through architectural design review and the way it has been?
Well, if it's an affordable housing project, we don't have the luxury of giving them that choice.
If it's a market rate.
Yeah, if it's a market rate project, we could.
Okay.
It's a common practice to have a two-track review process where you say, no, we don't like these standards. They're typologizing too much. This is conjecture. We're better than this. We want to subject ourselves to more discretionary standards. Go through a conditional use process, okay, or a subjective architectural review, Chapter 1860 as it exists, and they can choose to do so.
Okay.
The way it's set up now, can we do that, or this is a tweak we would need to make?
That's a tweak that we would need to make within 1850. We're not changing 1860. So 1860 design and architectural review stays the way it is. All non-residential projects are going to still be subject to 1860. So there's been a public comment or two or three about the landing. The landing is well over 2/3 non-residential. So 2/3 of that project is status quo on design review. It's only the housing component that's subject to, or would be subject to, objective design standards moving forward. We could, for example, write in the administration section, 1850-010, option 2, or subjective design guidelines process, and make it a very short statement. It just simply says market rate projects may opt to proceed through a discretionary architectural review process via Chapter 1860.
I'd support that.
You want me to write that in the draft form?
Mm-hmm.
Do we get a consensus on that? Okay.
Yeah, I like that.
Gives them more flexibility, for sure.
Mhm.
Okay, got it. I'll flesh that out a little.
Anything else
So-
to say? Okay.
Would the main difference between a market rate application and an affordable housing one, would the difference be mainly, besides the, of course, the density bonus, just be more concessions for an affordable housing project?
Yes. There are limitations against both statutory and case law interpretations of those concessions have put numbers on them to the tune of 4 waivers and unlimited concessions or something along those lines. But they do need to be connected with development viability and cost viability. So there is limitation around what staff can ask for in terms of justifying those findings. So the legal landscape is stilted towards supporting the affordable housing proposal that comes to the table asking for concessions in your design code. And again, I think that's why underscoring the importance of collaboration through objective measure is really important. I have found that, again, pick your adage, more flies with honey. We're going to be able to get, we're going to get more end result that's favorable to context through engaging early on objective measure. I think this is going to go a long way toward creating excitement and engagement in the design and development community that says, nice, finally, a set of clear and objective standards that are calibrated to a variety of different building types. It's not just one size fits all, and the contents here is unusual because of that. So I think it's set up well for that.
Yeah, nice, thank you. So with market rate, do they get any concessions ministerially, or if they just don't meet it, then they would come to the planning commission?
If they don't meet it, they will have to ask for a concession. Now, in administration, I think what we have a section 1815.010D, which talks about adjustments to standards. And it only touches on density bonus. There is no subsection right now that touches on adjustments to market rate projects. I think would be wise to contemplate that and explore that a little bit, because I can think of a few examples where we would, as we've already discussed, conflicts between increased or differing regulations within building code or fire code or energy code that compete. I think we should set up for that eventuality. So I'll flesh that out as well too.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah.
And you and I talked about this on the side. There are a couple of, duplex project and that Carmen fourplex project that I worked on. Just kind of put them to the test, to see how they hold up with our design standards.
Yeah, great idea.
So where would it fall, and would the concessions need to be made? And one of them is market rate, and the other is had a affordable housing component to it. So I think it's worth
That's a great idea.
seeing how they hold up.
Yep, will do.
They definitely don't have 40% glazing at the street.
Well, right, because they're all garage at the
Yeah,
street.
they're garages, yeah.
So, so right there, it doesn't meet it.
Mhm.
So that would have been a big concession,
I suppose so.
right? That's
Yeah.
that's one of our biggest
Yeah.
deals, is not having snouts. The snouts.
I want to use that as an example in the project, and as I was, expanding on some of these subsections, was contemplating that at your prompt during one of our subcommittee meetings to see if that, imagine fast forwarding that project to now, how would it perform? So yeah, I definitely going to do that.
That'd be great.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so I think one of the things you just touched on a little bit ago, I believe is also part of this conversation, is do we really want everything to come to the Planning Commission? I personally think that asking for a standalone duplex to come before the Planning Commission is a tad onerous, even probably a triplex. I think if it were a group of duplexes, this was the trigger when we were going through our, working this through about what we wanted to regulate. And the idea was that if a project proponent came and they were going to be, duplex, 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 duplex as part of a larger project, then we wanted to weigh in. hence putting duplexes on there. I think that if someone came with a single lot and was putting a single duplex on, I really don't think they need the expense, nor do I think we need to look at it. But I think we need to agree about that. And where's
I
our
agree.
threshold?
I agree.
I don't.
So you think like where my house is right now, if it burns down and we decide to put a duplex on it, you think I should come to the planning commission, even if it's a market rate duplex?
Here's the thing. How many times do we, during the course of the year, do they cancel the meeting because there's nothing on the agenda? There's nothing that I don't think that's gonna overflow our dockets. If somebody has something like that and we look at it, I don't see it being an issue.
It's not our agenda that I am concerned about. I am concerned about the cost and the additional expense for the builder.
So,
But everybody knows that they've gotta do that. I've built before, and you just know that that's part of the process. Just like getting your blueprints approved, it's just.
Well, what's the additional cost to come to planning commission? Musselman.
Well,
it-
we
It
don't-
would be ministerially in this case, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I know that other projects, depending on, there's different thresholds and there's a different cost associated.
Well, we're in a fee recovery, mandate, so we would, as part of this, the fee schedule for planning projects planning applications would be amended to receive this change. So we would, if you set up a two-tier review process, we would have two fees.
Right, the more
And one would-
expensive.
One would be, staff's time multiplied by, X number of hours, which would be a smaller number than would be the hours required to go before planning commission.
so is your suggestion triplexes and duplexes just get reviewed by the staff objectively?
Yeah, that would be my suggestion. A standalone
Well,
triplex and a standalone duplex that still need to meet the standards.
but since everything's objective and not subjective, why make any of it come to planning commission?
Yeah.
I don't think, I actually am not sure. I think on a large scale, I think we've gotten some feedback from the public that there's a lot of discomfort with something that's large scale, not coming to the planning commission. I think I have a bit of a concern that, well, we will have all gone through this. I think we'll have calibrated ourselves to understanding that it is not subjective, and they tick the box or they don't. But over time, I can see how the planning commission
So
could become a question mark.
if a project is in review and it comes to planning commission, can planning commission contest your findings? Staff's findings?
Yes, if you have objective reason for doing so.
Okay.
You could find, a project could come forward with either a recommendation of approval or denial. There could be reasons that either were unknown to staff at the time, a developer unwilling to comply with at the time. It's worth playing that scenario out without discretion, without interpretive authority, to a subjective standard or subjective measure. The scenarios are limited. They really do become very binary. I think the best case is, we have a finding that we're not meeting a half a dozen of these because there's conflicts in code. That seems to probably be the most evident one that will come before, particularly with complex projects.
Is it probably would more come with like concessions?
Correct. So that's where I was going next is, depending on how we write the concessions section for market rate projects, we'd have to make findings or require findings be made. In previous city the measure was going above and beyond in other categories to seek a concession in some categories.
So we're
You're
Cons-
moving, think of it about as, you're moving dollar signs around on the building.
so-
You know, you're not making a cheaper product for a market rate
Yeah,
project.
so concessions are somewhat subjective then.
They can be that opinion of the developer who says, or the architect or designer who says, you know, I think it's a better looking building this way. It may not meet standards, it may comply with the concessions subsection. In that case, you know, there is a little bit of interpretation there. And that's where we would probably test the process a little bit, and that's okay. You know, this is gonna be new for us, and the state understand, I think the courts probably understand that municipalities are trying to figure all this out, and it's a fluid statutory landscape, so there's some room there.
I've just seen how, you know, since I've been on the commission, I've seen where there's folks have tried to game, you know, permits for to overcome some of our housing. Well, I want to be specific. No, I don't want to be specific. I've seen where people tried to game by calling one thing something else, and it was obviously that it was a ruse. And but I think the idea is, if I was a contractor, maybe I knew I was getting billed for things, but I just built one, and I just kind of trickled to the next, just to kind of circumvent the process. These are the kinds of things I'm just thinking, you know, that we could see, and I'd rather not.
So you're thinking like somebody builds one duplex and then they build another one just like it, and all of a sudden
They
we have a
either
big
go-
project?
Yeah.
But wouldn't that be a trigger to, this is also, I mean, if they're contiguous, if they're in separate lots in separate parts of the city,
I can just see that's problematic, that's all.
I guess my goal is, how do we help? We want things to be built, and if we can make it easier to build something that's straightforward, you know, right now, it's very straightforward. You want to build a duplex, you can build a duplex, there is no design, nothing.
Well, if they need to have a, you know, special meeting, I'm happy to attend.
So that would be, but that's still before planning commission, so that's, again, time and money.
I think what Melanie's suggesting is fourplexes, triflexes, and below just get staff reviewed.
Staff
Anything
review only.
above those levels get
Planning
to a
commission.
subcommittee or planning commission.
Right, I don't want to eliminate objective design standards for duplexes and triplexes.
Yeah.
I only want to eliminate the expense and the time constraints of having it come to the full planning commission for
But
something
that's
as
only if-
simple.
That's only if they're asking for concessions, right?
No,
No, any duplex. If somebody wants to build a duplex on a formerly R1 lot, market rate or not, I just don't see why the planning commission needs to see it.
Well, I told you I'm opposed.
So we'll have to talk about that.
Why would they need to see it if it's going through a ministerial type of route?
Well, right now, the document
Objective.
reads that everything that goes through objective design standards, and we've set the threshold at duplex, comes to the planning commission.
I don't think we've selected exactly what, if we're gonna have a subcommittee
But,
or
yeah, just-
It
planning commission.
is a conversation. Right now, the way I think this draft
Yeah,
reads,
it-
it's
it
full
is-
planning
it-
commission.
There's an either or, but my understanding is that, and the way that your previous item was acted on is that we're subjecting all multifamily in R3, C1 and C2 to discretionary review by objective design standards. So right now, we're proceeding, subject to review by planning commission. Right now, the direction of this is that you are the review body at staff's recommendation for all projects moving forward, in all multifamily projects moving forward for compliance with these standards.
Right, and I
Very-
want to
and-
make a threshold so that it's not everything. That and wherever that, we can talk about that, I would put it, you know, definitely duplexes and triplexes are off our table. And fourplexes, then I'm, you know, somewhat ambivalent. We could have design review, because it is a bigger,
Section 1.1 in ministerial review, applicability, so it's on page 35 of the standards. Under administration, it says, ministerial review pursuant to this chapter applies to any of the following. And duplex and triplex is included as the first item. You could simply remove that and, or make a subsection, move it to another subsection. The following are subject to review by staff. You're still capturing the same compliance mechanism, these standards. You would only see it on appeal, for example.
right, and that's the other piece,
Yeah.
is if they felt that you denied it, they could appeal it to us.
Yeah, so, community could appeal, or, if it's denied, the applicant would appeal, and you'd see it. What that would do is capture the more controversial projects for your eyes.
Which
You
is
know,
part of the goal.
Yeah, and, the reason that we went here was because, as we discussed at the subcommittee level, the fly wants to live in my nose. The possibility that, from an adaptive reuse standpoint, a single developer could come in and consolidate, 3 lots, and under density bonus housing law, build a few, SB9 lot splits, et cetera. Under that current legal landscape, they could increase the density in an R1 zone, which is contrary to the intent of your previous action and this, to capture those what-if projects, to make sure they comply with what standards we have in place. By staff reviewing it, we're still going to capture it. You're right, it becomes the fee schedule and the more expensive path through you or instead of through staff is the issue. Is that going to be a constraint to the delivery of, small infill projects like duplexes and triplexes? That's your threshold challenge, I think.
And I would like to encourage them and remove, like say, objective design standards alone for duplexes is a new constraint.
Now, ADUs are another example. They're not in here, and they have more statutory protection. We've decided to kind of stay silent on ADUs. I think that was probably wise in its consistency and compliance with the intent of state law. We're trying to do off-the-shelf, pre-approved plans for ADUs, so we're going a step further with small projects. To do so with duplexes and triplexes falls into that line of reasoning. It's also quite possible that this would fall under the new statutory mandates around small projects, 10 units, 5 acres or less kind of thing, receiving streamlined provisions, which is currently the case with AB 684. And that was highlighted in public comment that we received about, that I sent to you all with my rebuttal. And I would submit that if you're going to begin to waive or provide exceptions for smaller projects, that it becomes nuanced and potentially could become more so with continued statutory changes in the next cycle. So in the next 8 years, it's likely we're going to see more changes.
Well, then we're inevitably going to have to revisit this.
So you're right, that's to my point, is it's going to be up to you all to frankly re-examine this annually as we test it, so.
But in the short term, I'd like to see some of these an infill project and make it easy.
What I thought you were saying, Melanie, was to like exempt, you know.
Completely exempt.
Yeah, completely, like it is now.
Oh.
You know, like not even change it for duplexes on a single small lot that couldn't be divided if they wanted to, you know.
Oh, I was just removing the planning commission piece for that, because right now, the way it reads is that project, that duplex project would come before us to.
As a ministerial
as a-
review committee.
As
right?
the, right, objective design, as the planning commission reviewing all objective design standard, all multifamily housing. And, yeah, so I'm not saying to eliminate that, I'm only saying eliminate the planning commission piece on 2 levels.
I see.
So keep
So
the,
now are you talking about the sub-planning commission too?
no, I'm not. I am
Okay.
only talking, it would either go to staff, those would just go to staff. And staff would be responsible for objective design standards for duplexes and triplexes.
I agree with you. I'm not contesting you. I don't see why all the projects need to come, if it's objective and there's no, I mean, besides, I guess, maybe doing checks and balances with staff, but I'm sure if
Which is why there is a planning
projects
commission in the first
start
place.
going through that are drastically out of the objective design standards, there's gonna be other processes to, I don't know, wheel in staff.
Well, right, if we see something built, but then it's sort of too late. No, I think you have a good point.
I don't really see with objective design standards the need for any of them to come to planning commission.
Well, we were talking about like a smaller committee.
No, I get that,
Yeah.
but somehow we
We kind of
overstepped the subcommittee. Subcommittee, I see the subcommittee, but for the costs associated with everything having to come fully to planning commission, I don't really see the necessity of it.
I actually agree, but I have the sense that the community was concerned, but perhaps not. I could be convinced
Again,
to
it would be up to, after this is adopted, it would be a process amending the municipal code again, goes through you and goes to council again. So once this gets inked and adopted, the path toward amendment is one that staff encourages, particularly with new code. It's going to happen with certainty. If not with respect to review authority, some of the contents itself, as we move forward, we can expect that. So it's possible to even, frankly, make that clear now, that moving forward, that gets folded into the review process, annual updates, for example, to reflect consistency with state law changes.
Mark, write that in there. I completely agree. I think an annual review is a great idea. Okay, well, so I don't know that we've decided on this because we don't have complete consensus yet. So
I
maybe
think our
we'll, what's that?
problem is we approved the first motion earlier, and that says that everything that's going to ODS gets fully reviewed by the full planning commission. We just approved that to go to city council and get sent off to the state. So we can't address this at all until we come back to we'd have to do a complete code amendment then.
Yeah, the action that you took previously said ministerial review by planning commission, subject to these standards. So if we,
Wait, but
included the
so,
duplex.
but the standards were a placeholder that is a draft. So we can change it.
as long as planning commission stays as the regulatory authority for objective design standards, if you remove the duplexes and triplexes from this, then you're still in compliance with that motion, that action.
The only thing we wouldn't be in compliance with is if we wanted a smaller committee to review it rather than the whole planning
Right,
commission.
right. If you change that regulatory body, then you're out of compliance with the motion you just made, or the action you just took. The motion is, or the action you took was multifamily residential, subject to review by planning commission for compliance with objective design standards in R3, C1, C2. So the choice moving forward is back to Commissioner McDowell's observation or recommendation that there's a two-track process, you know, or under current 1860, we don't look at duplexes and triplexes, right? So by omitting them or removing them from the objective design standards, you're still in compliance with the action you took.
Okay, so we can regulate them, but not require the planning commission to review them. Cool.
Correct.
Okay, but I sort of feel like I'm ready to move on, and maybe we'll revisit this afterwards and see how everybody feels after these people have come to workshop with us and would like to have your input. So if that works with everybody?
Yeah.
Go for the workshop now, revisit this a little later. Okay, please, in a moment, maybe are we gonna take a little break? Or would you like to take a break? You can have a break.
You didn't need Melanie's permission.
No, but I just wondered if we can wait till Jeff returns to. So we are effectively taking a break because I think we'll want his feedback. I think when we have some back and forth. Okay, so how the workshop is going to work, please come up. There's not really a time limit. I'd like you to have people to stay on topic. Back and forth, you can ask us questions, we'll ask you questions. You can come up a second time if you realize, or a third time if you realize that you forgot to say something. So it's pretty informal, and we'd love to have your input. So first person who I would like to come up, please do. Or would somebody like to come up and join us for the workshop? Does somebody have questions?
I think this is more informal than public comment.
Much more informal, because
So there
there's
can
no.
be back and forth.
There is back and forth, there's no time limit,
Okay.
and there is an opportunity to return, if you'd like. Please introduce yourself so that folks can hear you. Know who you are.
Cindy Lee Cohn. One thing I didn't mention is that I'm currently building a model tiny house that will be taking around the county to have open houses and tutorials on tiny house village living. So I just wanted you to know that's part of my passion and why I'm here today, is that wanting to see more of that happening in this county and in this city. So I have a couple of questions about, I'm trying to make my way through the report, which is fairly complex, but also I was able to make get some clarity. I wanted to know how many units are allowed now on R3 and C1, C2?
Well, that depends. Go ahead, Jeff.
Density, what's your next question? I can get you an answer.
Well, okay, you're getting the answer. Then I just want to make sure I heard correctly that the Planning Commission is the only committee making the decision on whether to reject or accept a proposal from a developer. Is that correct? Or is there another body that's overseeing that?
We discussed whether we would exempt triplexes and duplexes from the full planning commission review and leave that with staff. Other than that, yes, if it's
that's what
multifamily, it becomes before
Okay, that's
the
what I
planning
wanted to be
commission.
sure.
But that's a question I have. It would be if there was a trust-owned piece of property with multiple tiny homes on it, how does that fit into our objective design standards, or does it? Is it a multifamily, or is it because the individuals own their homes, then they are not subject to review because they're single-family homes?
Yeah, so we've talked a little bit about this at a staff level, and we've engaged with Cindy Lee's group. The simple answer is there's a really good case study that you guys saw, which was the Nest project. Jacob Barr and company came through, their family came through with the Nest. And that's whatever it was, 12 units, I think, or 13 units, yeah, on one parcel. So even though there's one building with 6 and 2 duplexes and a single family, it's one parcel. So it fell under commercial or multifamily building code. In the case of a project where the parcel lines are, drawn around each unit, then it becomes more, if it's less than 4 units, it becomes single family, duplex, triplex. It's not commercial building code doesn't apply. As separate and distinct completely from the tiny home project type, which could be more, could deliver a dwelling unit on wheels, could be set down on a foundation or a skirt, if you will, and we all know what they look and feel like. They come pre-certified as occupiable units. So the only thing that we look at from a design standpoint, from a building code standpoint, from a municipal code standpoint, is the foundation and the site improvements.
Because it's considered a mobile home, is that?
Yes. So it is it comes pre-certified as an RV.
Right.
Our code is silent on that for the most part. We were contemplating in a couple of meetings with their group the legal landscape at a municipal code scale, how to make provisions for these kinds of projects, this product type. And there would need to be a chapter. I've created one before for previous cities. It's rather simple. It's just simply saying that as a definitional standard, this project is allowed in this zone. You could further exempt it from these standards, much like ADU law, for example, is currently crystal clear on provisions related to pre-approved designs. You could do the same for tiny homes. You could set up standards around, lot area, coverage, setbacks, all sorts of things. That would be, again, a municipal code. You would be creating a section of code, much like we are here. It would be done in a collaborative workshop fashion. What does this community need in this kind of documentation to help provide for a regulatory landscape that's conducive to these kinds of projects? We would collaborate, create it in public review form. We would send it, post it, distribute it, engage with the community on it, and engage in a process to ensure that the municipal code reflects that intent. So that's a mouthful, probably more than you asked for, but point being, it doesn't exist in our code now, and we would need to make the changes so that it does.
So there's nothing in our code now that if somebody wanted to get an acre of vacant land and throw 5 foundations on it and put tiny homes on it?
It would if they sat on foundations. So the building code definition for this is in the constructability category of conversation. If these tiny homes were delivered to site, they were lifted off their chassis or off the wheels and placed onto a foundation, they become manufactured housing,
Right.
which is allowed by right. It would be subject to our design standards under that particular section. where
Isn't
we-
there something in our municipal code that you're not allowed to live in an RV?
Yes. 14 days is a limit for RVs I don't recall offhand what the provision for location is, whether it's, I think it's pretty much citywide. So because it's an RV and they're going to permanently occupy it, and it's placed on a wheel with an aesthetic skirt around it from a design standard standpoint, so that they don't, look like a bunch of RVs on a site. They fit into more of a built bricks and mortar typology, which is the aesthetic intent. Then you could make a provision within a separate chapter of code. If, however, they take the wheels off and drop them on foundations, and those foundations are approved by us, by the city, for building code compliance, then they would be subject to these standards and our municipal code, and they would be allowed.
And become permanent structures.
Correct. And then if you want to move them someday, you put the wheels back on, demo the CMU foundation, make it available for brick, wood, stick-built structure on top, or another tiny home in its place, or a manufactured home in its place.
So Jeff, I'm wondering, are we really just kind of creating a new category somewhere in between motorhome and mobile home park?
You are, in a way. Tiny home movement is much about that. It is a cultural embodiment of something beyond what is typical in occupancy. It's been flourishing around the edges a little bit in a not unregulated but deregulated fashion, and to embrace it intentionally is exciting. By my measure, having experienced this before in other jurisdictions, which are highly regulatory around aesthetics. There's lots of good precedent out there should we choose to go this direction.
Would a container fall under that category?
Not if we don't want it to.
Are they by definition not built on site? Are tiny homes by definition built off-site?
If they're built, they're usually built on site and then delivered off-site, delivered on site. Not entirely. I mean, it depends on who's building it and where. Sometimes they're built entirely on site and stuck right there. But for the most part, the big manufacturers are, location is everything. Friction of distance from an economic standpoint is huge. So, you get builders that are localized and serve the community for a sorely needed form of housing.
So what kind of permit would be needed for, I'm envisioning one piece of property, all of a sudden there's just added. And then next thing you know, you got noise abatement issues, you got light abatement issues, you got all these other things going on. How do we protect against,
The existing municipal, we have pretty good life, health, safety mandates in our general plan and municipal code, and we have code enforcement that's robust by measure, and abatement chapter of the code makes it pretty clear that you can be fined. Those fines aren't cheap.
those hookups that they use, is it just essentially for the sewer and water?
Well, again, if they're true tiny homes, then they'd probably, if they're brought in a unified way, and there's builders here who know more than I, but they're usually hard piped to on-site or city sewer, depending on where they're located.
So we don't know if that would be a septic or if it would be a sewer.
It would be inspected under new code by us and approved by us and certified by us. So that's part of the site approval standards,
I mean, the concept of somebody, as long as it matches in the neighborhood, or it's not being put in a neighborhood of 4,000 square foot homes, doesn't, I'm not, if somebody just wants, they're out in the outskirts someplace and still city limits, I guess, and they want to do something like that, I don't necessarily have a problem with it. What I have a problem with is the expansion of one becoming more. Next thing you know, you've got 5 or 6 of those on a piece of property, and because people aren't going to understand the difference between a motor home and a mobile home, and somewhere now in between. And it's going to get,
Well, I think that's what the purpose of this new chapter would be, is just to really make some standard provisions on what's allowed.
Because what I'm hearing is we don't have any.
We do, so keep in mind too that we do have in our building type standards right now, so 1850-040, so in the ODS, we do have two typologies called cottage court and pocket neighborhood. Both of those are designed essentially to achieve from a mass scale form building location on site sense what a form that's analogous to a tiny home, a small structure that is independent, not common wall, surrounded by open space around a central courtyard space. So from a design intent, it's already here. Whether or not it's set on a foundation or skirt, frankly,
Who owns the land?
Well, if it's a trust, so it sounds like there's not lot lines, it's a,
it would fall under multifamily building code, and if, unless there is a separate chapter of code in our municipal code that pertains particularly to detached, what I'm going to call detached multifamily. It would capture a little bit of the nest, sort of hedging because there was a sixplex and a duplex and a single-family home. Nonetheless, it was one parcel with 13 units, so we called it multifamily. In this case, there would be, let's say, 13 independent, single-unit, living structures that look like a single-family dwelling. They're, a few hundred square feet as opposed to 1,000 square feet, and they would be regulated from a municipal code standpoint under building code. And a new chapter of our code. From a design standpoint, they'd be regulated by and subject to objective design standards, and we're sort of teeing them up for that here.
So the people would essentially be leasing a space?
They'd, just like a rental unit, they'd rent out, just like the intent for cottage court is that you got a small cottage on 13 small cottages on one big piece of property. I've lived in one before, and you rent it out, and it's yours, and you get rights to common open space.
but I thought one of the models was that they would be owned. The
Your-
trust model
your-
is ownership.
Community land, you guys are confusing community land trust and tiny homes. You're skewing them together.
This
And-
might be a good example for, or
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. The model is the same, essentially. It's, from a design standpoint and a municipal code standpoint, it's really the same. Ownership and civil rights beyond the ground and the form and the code are up to the model, the ownership on site. We don't care. Community land trusts are something that the municipal code would be silent on. We would allow it in form, but we would, that's overreach to control the form of ownership for a given project. We don't say that an LLC or a corp, an S corp, should be behind an organization, a development any more than we would
So then-
a CLT.
What would regulate me going and buying a 2-acre parcel and putting in sewer and water hookups to have 10 sites for tiny homes and leasing them as like an RV park?
Nothing, as long as it complied with the municipal code, which right now if you wanted to put them on foundations, then the municipal code applies. If you wanted to keep them as true tiny homes, so they are more temporary and movable and mobile, then they're still under RV code, and we'd need to change the municipal code to receive that type of development.
So currently, right now in the city, if a tiny home on wheels, because an ADU is technically a tiny home because it's under 500 square feet.
Yeah.
So if it's a tiny home on wheels, are those currently permitted or not permitted in the city? Because they classify as RVs and you can't stay for more than 14 days in
They
an
are
RV.
not.
They are not, okay.
They are not, the code is silent, and we have a permissive code, which is sort of an oxymoron. If it's not there, it's not permitted.
Okay.
So using his scenario, would there be one sewer permit for that whole property, or would they each have to have one?
That would be up to the ownership. They could sub-meter everything and control those rates themselves, or that how they would proportion their rates.
And that would take a special license, wouldn't it?
From a building code.
Acting as a utility, they can't do that.
I think we've sub-metered projects before for ADUs, for example, for multiple units. I think I'd have to look into the bars project, but they might even have sub-metered.
Well, again, just to be clear, I'm not against tiny homes at all. I like them. I think that they certainly would help a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. I'm just trying to get the concept, because I'm not real clear on it, because there's a lot of fuzzy space there to me.
Well, again, if you look at the diagram in section 7 of the objective design standards, what you'll see is a site plan that has boxes, a bunch of small boxes scattered around a site. I would suggest to you here and now that you know, from a diagrammatic site planning level, you're really talking about something that's very similar. All we do is regulate in this code the cottage court, which shows 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 units around a central green that has width and depth standards and separation between cottages standards. Pedestrian access, shared court shall be accessible from the street. Vehicle access and parking shall be located to comply with site planning standards. And we have open space minimum standards that are centralized to the general organization of the units. So I would submit to you that diagrammatically it's going to look very, very similar under this vision. The only difference is that in cross-section, you're going to see, instead of a foundation, you'll see wheels and skirts. But frankly, from the street, you won't be able to see much of a difference. You'll still see cute little structures surrounded by landscaping and populated by really happy people.
Populated by who?
Really happy people.
Oh, unless they're neighbors.
I just want to be clear that the Siskiyou Housing Alliance is not just about tiny houses. We're looking at workforce affordable housing. However, we can find ways to do that because we have a problem with keeping employees who can't find housing close enough to even make it worth gas from Weed to Mount Shasta and be able to keep our businesses vital. And so this is what we're all about, is keeping our businesses vital here in Mount Shasta by making sure that people who are employed there can afford to live here and work here. So it's not just about tiny houses. We're looking at tiny houses as one of the options for people being able to live here and work here and be part of the workforce. Yeah. So the next question I had, wow.
That's a workshop for you, huh?
That's a great workshop. Well, you were going to answer how many units are allowed now in R3 and C1, C2?
We have. What are your zones?
R3 and C1, C2.
Yeah, R3 is, I should have these numbers memorized, but my density brain, my density synapses. Yeah.
It's multitasking.
We stalled all this time and you still don't have it.
My intuition was, my gut feeling was right. It was 20 units an acre for R3. C1 is 20 units an acre. C2 is 20 units an acre. And if there are deed restrictions, that would go up.
Okay.
By density bonus housing law, depending on the amount of deed restrictions.
That makes sense. Thank you. I was wondering which of the standards that the Planning Commission will not accept or compromise on is there a hierarchy of standards? You were talking about if someone came to you and said, "Oh, we'll do 30 out of the 50 standards," and you look at those 20 that they're not doing. Is there a hierarchy of standards that you would say, these ones we won't be compromising on, these ones we can be creative with and work with? I know
Ooh,
that
that's
codes,
a really hard, and
well, I
think-
know codes are definitely in that answer, because codes are,
Right.
they're not movable.
Right, there's things, right, like you said, building codes.
I thought about this, and I think I have the beginning of an answer that I'd like to throw to you. So, as I mentioned, we mined our code, our municipal code, and dumped a bunch, co-located a bunch in here. I think that the way to approach this is to say that the more direct standards that were mined and are reinforced by existing presence in our municipal code should be the priorities. Those are the ones that rise to a level of protecting life, health, safety throughout the year. I think a lot of those are the site standards, so snow removal, separation between units for fire code, compliance with building code stuff about separation between buildings and setbacks and, all that stuff. Certainly, we're already deferring heights to our base zones. We're not touching heights in our ODS. But I think the logic might be to go through these and begin to categorize them by import to preservation of life, health, safety. And then the design code, the more designy side of them, and, as I look at these standards right now for the cottage court, I'd say, well, why can't we park, diagrammatically different than this? What if we parked in the front of the ones on a side street or an alley and behind them? So I think there might be some wiggle room in there, some sort of discretion by priority that we could start to fold into this. Because we did talk about this way back when at one of our subcommittee meetings, and we never really resolved it. I think it might be worth some more thought.
Well, right, if it's deed restricted, that's when, or affordable housing, that's when we have those conversations. I think we're not wanting to have those conversations for market rate.
Okay. Well, you're bringing up the height and the number of stories, and that was my last question, which is, do you already have in place the number of stories that are allowable in the zoning or the height restriction? You already have that in place. And can I find that in this report today?
No, that's the existing municipal code. So, for example, in C2, the height is 45 feet, and we don't distinguish among stories. If you can fit 4 stories in 45 feet, more power to you. Same with R2 or C1. That height is 45 feet, and then it's 45 feet in R3, because the R3 standards kind of prevail throughout the commercial codes, and then it's 35 feet in R2.
It's 35 feet in R3?
R2.
R2.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I feel like you answered my questions very well, and I'm really appreciating the work that you put into this.
So my
City
question
planning.
is, a tiny home.
Are you
Should
asking to Cindy Lee, or are we asking
No, I'm
Jeff?
sorry, I'm asking Jeff.
Oh, thanks.
That this might benefit her. A tiny home, shouldn't there be a height restriction of something less than 45 feet? I mean, I'm thinking about wind shear alone, I mean.
Well, it's already going to come pre-certified as an RV. You're not going to get a 45-foot RV. So
Right, but you could get a 2-story, essentially one, can't
But
you?
you're still stuck at 14 feet or whatever height code is for RVs.
Yeah.
You can't drive anything on the road.
So if somebody wants to build something on top of one though, after they already have it?
no, tiny homes are, I think it's 14,
13 and a half.
13.6, yeah.
I've seen them put
Yeah,
cabanas and all the like on them.
Yeah.
I've seen that done.
yeah. 13.6 is what they come on wheels at max, yeah.
So, not off subject, but would they petition the city to create an ordinance to allow tiny homes in the code, or how does that process happen?
No, you would direct staff to begin to study a tiny home code.
Okay.
This is parallel to this initiative. I think what we're trying to say here is this is a group that's supporting housing for workforce, missing middle, and affordable housing typologies that kind of get lost. They fall into the middle. They're not deed restricted, they're unique in form of ownership, and our code is silent. It shouldn't be by their recommendation, and so let's work together to build the model.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, so go ahead, introduce yourself, please, again.
Hi, I'm Evan Drake again, and I can speak directly to what you just asked. There's a recent appendix to the IBC that specifically identifies tiny house building code, and it identifies pretty much all aspects of the structure and fire and height and everything. It would probably make a workshop really easy to look at that appendix and go through the provisions in it, because it is complete. And yeah, I just wanted to come up and mention that Appendix Q in the IBC recently. I think it was passed in California for like ADUs. I haven't looked at it too much, but I know that it's a really good starting place for this kind of a conversation. So, and I'm also wondering, this is the Planning Commission. This isn't the regulatory body for building code, is it?
No.
No, okay, yeah. So would that be a separate, to introduce provisions for tiny houses in the building code, would that be going to a separate council to discuss, or would that be through this?
You would come forward to staff. Staff would then seek direction from council. We would then move through the regulatory process. This body does not regulate building code. It's
Right.
Title 15. No, yeah, Title 15. That's council's purview, so we would probably, and one reason I'm hedging is because there's a bit of overlap here. So I think
Sure.
my advice procedurally would be to work with your group, if directed to do so by this body.
Okay.
We'd kind of workshop it a little bit, say, here's what we got, and then we would get their fingerprints and engagement, and that would be a public process as well.
Right.
Then we'd go to council with it, and then
Okay.
that would change Title 15 with what we would call reach codes. So it's not uncommon for communities to go above and beyond the 2022 building codes that are effectively the model code offered by the state. So, and it's not uncommon, as you probably know, to have communities that have specific provisions. So that's where we'd head.
Mm-hmm. So it would be workshopped with this group and then presented to City Council?
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
great, thank you.
And we could start that process if these guys are so direct us. We could start tomorrow engaging on it and have a parallel process that brings this model forward in concurrence with the objective design standards, so that the subsequent municipal code amendments are triggered as soon as this is adopted.
That would be fantastic. What is the timeline on the amendments that you're making to the objective design standards? You said
It's up to the chair here tonight in this body, but I think this has been in the works for 6 months now, and I think by my estimation, I think we're getting to a pretty complete and robust document, but it's not to say that there aren't a whole bunch of changes that could continue to be made,
Okay.
particularly in light of what we've discussed tonight.
Yeah.
We could probably come, I don't know, it's up to you guys.
At least one more meeting here, so that'd be next month, and then it would go to city council and they have their process.
Okay, yeah. I wonder what it would take to workshop that next meeting, if it would be feasible for us to push that forward.
Yeah, if these guys are in agreement, I'm getting lots of head nods that really this is a typology that's worth regulating, and let's explore it, then we could bring forth as a part of the workshop next meeting.
Right, because it is
Yeah, totally.
part of, okay.
Mhm.
Well, great, yeah, and I'll come with materials and.
Yeah, let's work together so that I could fold it into the material here in the staff report and
Great.
get it formalized in the record, yeah.
Sure.
That would be lovely, so we could have it ahead of time, so we would have time to review, and the
Yeah.
public would have time to review as
Mhm.
part of our packet.
Okay, yeah.
That would be,
Yep.
a lot of,
Pictures would be good.
Yeah, and we could roll a tiny home up in the park.
Sounds like it's happening.
Oh, I'd love that.
That'd be fun.
I don't know how we do that
convene in
with a
Yeah,
brown
we
ash
could have the meeting there.
thing. Oh,
Yeah. Okay, well, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you, much
Thank you.
appreciated.
It's very good timing, actually, that you're coming to us.
Yeah,
Would it wouldn't roll into the objective design standards, would it?
Say again?
It wouldn't roll into the objective design standards.
I think that would be up to you to formulate an exemption here,
I mean, to me, it seems like it's a way different.
recognizing the obvious that, you know, by design, you're going to be within the impact threshold aesthetically, and it's more about other codes that are essentially pre-approving or certifying these, much like ADUs. I think there really should be, from a staff standpoint, I think this is low-hanging fruit that we don't need to over-regulate in objective design standards, as long as it's within the aesthetic envelope that we're intending to create here. I think that's your justification and your findings.
let's
I
make it
think-
easy to make this happen.
Because what you're saying is the standards, the intent of these standards, small, modular, context-driven, context-sensitive design, is folded into the code that we create. And that chapter, that separate chapter of the IBC gets to be customized by any community for any reason. So we could include a design component to it, and I know that jurisdictions do that. So it comes hardwired, if you will, with design standards, and is effectively, or could be exempt from 1850, if you so choose, because the standards are reflected within the separate chapter itself.
And the site plan would be part of that, yeah,
Yeah,
because that's going to be the
Yeah.
main.
yeah, well, I mean, simplify it, co-located, and, you know, they're unique enough forms of development that, I mean, this is for permanent bricks and mortar, foundation-driven architecture and development. That's the aesthetic we're trying to control here. And we're recognizing the separate and distinct nature of this product type, and we're creating its own section of municipal code to comply with, and that's it. That's all it has to comply with. That's easy regulation. Unless you feel otherwise,
I'm processing it.
okay.
I don't,
That's just my recommendation on the fly. You
I mean,
know,
I don't, yeah.
Yeah.
I see the, not that I have anything against them, but I see the negative impact it could have, that every empty lot gets filled with 6 tiny homes, and it becomes like looking like Jacksonville, where it's just mobile homes and portable homes. And not brick, because you can get a tiny home for $60,000, and that same house is $150,000 to build. And it just gets infilled with.
I think if the design standards are robust enough, it's not gonna look any different than the typology that we've got teed up here.
The cottage court.
The cottage court. I mean, we have lot dimension standards that minimum lot size, dimensions at the lot scale that are already in 1816, our base zones. And the only difference really is that the width and depth of these cottage courts are 32 feet by 32 feet with 7-foot minimum separation.
Maximum.
And that's a pretty dense little package, and it's a ADU, it's a 640 square foot unit.
So, I mean, I'm thinking,
Excuse me, 900 square feet. 900 square feet.
if I look at the cottage court design, which, I mean, to differentiate it from a mobile home park, which I think of a traditional mobile home park where they're queued up like this, and then everybody's got their adjacent driveway, and what this design prevents that. Is that what you're thinking? You want to avoid maybe more the traditional mobile home park look?
I don't know.
If that's
I-
traditional.
To me, if it's gonna be permanent housing, it should be on a foundation.
Otherwise, all that is a mobile home park, they're just smaller.
Right, and
They're a fancy modern-day mobile home park.
Yeah.
right,
A
but if they.
chic mobile home park.
Chic mobile home, but if they're
Trendy
like,
for now.
if they're like our cottage court, where they don't have, home, driveway, home, driveway, home, driveway, perhaps that shifts it. Is that what they're thinking? I don't know. Maybe, we haven't found out about the design guideline. It's not that's your vision, is the cottage court for people who can't hear through the mic. Okay, thank
And
you.
so what my point aesthetically is that it falls into the intent of the cottage court from a site planning standpoint. If you were to take this section and move that over to the design guidelines or design standards section of a new tiny home chapter, then you get to control all the design look and feel of it. You get to set regulations on skirting wheels. You get to set all these, location of parking, the size of the open space, the orientation of that open space. So from the street, it's going to look and feel very much like these. The only difference is
They're gonna
that-
be 8 feet wide.
Right. And you're gonna see probably a lot more landscaping and open space because they're smaller and less built development form. So the fear around RV park look, feel within R1 neighborhoods, I think, is up to us to mitigate through this chapter.
Looking at workshopping this, would it be possible for us to send you some examples that are successful in the cottage style? Some real, so you can actually see some visuals of what you would be looking at.
Please send them to Jeff. We'd love
Okay.
to see that. Thank you.
We will do that. We will do that.
We
Okay.
could even do site tours if you want. There's examples that are relatively local.
Oh, that'd be lovely, too.
Is there, one other question, is there such a thing as a double wide tiny home?
Oh, good question.
Where two
That's
halves
kinda
come
going where I
together
was
to make a
going
wider,
to begin with.
I was thinking duplex tiny homes. Does that,
Larger than the vehicle code allows on highways. Can you-
yeah, like instead of, like
Yeah.
16 feet
go ahead,
wide
but we
instead
need
of
you
8.
at the mic so that the public can hear you. Thanks.
You're asking about examples of double wide tiny houses?
Or duplex, maybe, tiny
Duplex,
homes.
Interesting.
But are those permissible?
Sky's the limit.
I have seen a double wide tiny house. It has been done. It's conducive to a foundation, though. To park two tiny houses together and connect them is pretty difficult. And then to separate them again is also quite difficult because ultimately you have to, well, I won't go into the construction of it, but it's uncommon, but possible. A duplex tiny house seems like an oxymoron. It seems sort of, it's a very small house already.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it would be, I mean, the longest you can go is 30 feet, I'm pretty sure, and the widest you can go is 10, but then you have to have moving permits. So ultimately, if you split it into two, 10 by 15, it's not much of a house. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was the point I was trying to make earlier.
We
This
could
kind of thing-
use your mic as much as you can,
Okay.
Ron. Thanks.
So that's my concern, is that I can see this end up being a kind of a Frankenstein thing, and just, it needs to, it's good that we're talking about this, because next thing you know, there's gonna be 3 wide mini houses, and, I'm just, if there's a way for things to get bent out of where we intend them to be, I'd like to kind of save us all the trouble and kind of put a stop to it up front with, better ideas of what the ground rules are.
If you want us to explore it from a code standpoint to see what kinds of aesthetic possibility there are in the industry, then
rather limit
we
it.
could explore that with limits and say that the tiny home sideboards are set with the following 5 priorities, to your point. It's up to you to create those restrictions so that we don't end up with the Frankenstein You know, I mean, I get the point being that,
I mean, people are
If-
creative, and that's cool, but you know what, there's a time and a place for it.
right, if unified, if they're all delivered on one project, then you're gonna have the same builder delivering the same sort of unified architectural aesthetic to these 13 little collection of cottages that are little RVs with skirts, around a beautifully landscaped, you know, within a beautifully landscaped context. On the other hand, you know, a year from now, when the middle one decides to move to Tahoe, and you got a new one coming in, and it looks different, is that defeated by, or does it defeat the intent of our code?
I just think about how, say, just even our sign ordinance has been encroached upon, going up and down Mount Shasta Boulevard. There's people without permits with nice big signs, there's people with permits, and it just seems like in time, things just kind of grow, and then next you know, we've got a problem, we're trying to figure out how to solve it.
Yep. So it's build it wisely. If we want to move forward with this code, it's something that you've got an eager market that's delivering itself to this room right now. Question is, do you want to entertain it or not?
I absolutely do. And to the point about, so somebody takes their tiny home that you said the model is, there's this trust with the land. They own their mobile tiny home and they take it. And so a new one comes in, designed by somebody else, aesthetically different. I mean, that's a possibility.
It's a very good question. Yeah. I guess my question would be, does a new structure fall into like the jurisdiction of this commission? If it is, someone leaves, someone comes, is that per approval of this group, or is it sort of once the project is defined, it's over and things come and go?
I have an answer.
Without oversight.
That falls into the category of substantial conformance with the original entitlement. So you would come before staff, and staff would look at the replacement unit, and we would say, does it substantially conform with the approval?
So then it would.
And
be
that's a
the
legal
commission
term
making
of art, so for sure, we would have some discretion to say, you know, the crystal triangle on wheels doesn't quite meet the
the glass
It
pyramid.
seems,
the alpine.
Don't give them any ideas.
I'm going to build that now. Yeah.
it almost seems, and I may be wrong, but aren't mobile home parks heavily regulated? Aren't mobile home parks heavily regulated in getting licensed to operate and function?
Yes.
So
More
it
so
almost
than-
sounds like this is a loophole in the law using the community land trust to lease land for tiny homes to skirt the regulations around mobile home parks.
Well, that's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it is that the mobile home industry is replete with abuse by historic landowners with externalized control at the state level despite local regulations. I speak from experience in trying to regulate mobile home parks. If you are not the regulating authority, which is at a local level, it defers to House HCD.
Yeah.
And that is Sacramento, who theoretically sends people on site to regulate the look, feel, and layout of these units, and ownership is not represented locally. It is a for-profit model, and again, in my experience, is highly legally rife. I would offer that getting out in front of this from a regulatory standpoint is a wise move, and it should be done by my recommendation with lots of insight and intelligence gleaned from these folks and experience in the field, particularly with respect to RV parks, so that we don't end up with that.
Well, I'm thinking about that property next to Hall Winery there on 29 that just sat there depleted and looked like garbage and crap for the longest time. Now they're starting to do something. But 10 years it's been like that. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, rental, and, you know, again, this is a slippery slope toward bias around rental or lease occupancy, but I think the land trust model delivers with it, by definition, a pride of ownership. I don't think, I would be very, very surprised if 15 years from now, we're going to be pointing to the 4 CLT projects in Mount Shasta, or pick a number, as among our poster child developments for code enforcement problems. I think we're going to probably find the legal non-conforming stuff that's out there right now, your case in point, as the ones that we still haven't built code around because they're legal non-conforming. We missed it back in the day. So again, staff's recommendation at this point is to get out in front of it, do so from the grounds up, and you know, state regulation, understanding state regulations as top down, meet in the middle, make it wise code.
Is the nonprofit land trust model the primary one that's out there? Should we be considering other models besides the land trust model?
We feel it's the best for the purposes that we've identified. Maybe Catherine can speak to this. It seems to be the most equitable and the clearest path toward home ownership for people of medium to low income. There may be other alternatives that we can explore, but so far this has been our focus.
Instead of a rental, so this is, what if there were rentals stay, like the land trust and they had rental properties?
That exists, and that's certainly possible. A lot of CLTs utilize rentals for income, and yes, rentals are certainly possible.
You don't have an ownership requirement, though, in the CLT model.
No.
You can be an absentee owner and rent your tiny home out, right?
It's case by case.
Yeah.
It's the bylaws of the organization.
Yeah, and again, this is a civil matter. It's not, we can't regulate ownership. We couldn't come in and say that, you know, we're going to control the entity by which, or the entity that controls a rental apartment any more than we could,
Right, but
you know, someone owning property. Say again?
How many people could live in a tiny house?
Oh, that's standard, health and safety code. We already have provisions.
We're calling them mobile homes, and,
Yeah.
I'm just, yeah.
Yeah, again, the code itself, we create this code. It's good that we have skeptics and proponents and builders and designers in this conversation. Yeah. No, that's what creates good code. You know, you really make it honest and complete and robust. Yeah.
I would add that the model, because it involves community members and local, like civil servants and people on boards like this, I think it's uniquely resilient toward problems like you're referring to. It's internally regulated for the benefit of the community. It's because the land is owned by the nonprofit, there is some say and some prescription, for what can be done on it and what's accepted. So there is a lot of inherent responsibility with a model like this. It's not a single private owner that has unlimited authority. It's a group of people from the broad body of the city, that are regulating, addressing, creating standards for the community.
I could see people having weekend places like that up here and staying there, and that's their weekend place, and that's fine. I prefer seeing people with low income coming in and getting some place to live. But
I don't like the aspect that you can rotate them in and out.
Most CLTs don't have tiny houses. Most CLTs are foundation, brick and mortar. Yeah, and again, tiny houses are not, the only thing here. The group has discussed a lot of different options. The rotation element is specific to a tiny house village or a mobile home park, and that's something to be discussed for sure.
I think I should be clear, and I can check with our city attorney on this, but just a few years back, I was part of a CLT project that came in to create a project on property owned by a school district, specifically for teachers. Because in Upper Napa Valley, land is gold, and it's hard for folks like me to afford to live there. So this model came in fundamentally to provide ownership opportunities or long-term lease opportunities with equity interest in the project that was controlled with, internally developed rules and regulations. The city didn't regulate those provisions. They let the form of ownership by directive to essentially self-govern and manage itself. As long as they met the zoning code setbacks, heights, look, feel, architectural guidelines, et cetera, that CLT was essentially silent to us. We wouldn't have, nor would we, as I've mentioned, regulate an LLC over a C Corp owning, a multifamily project, or, the form of ownership, or whatever you want to call yourself, owning a single family home. As long as the look, feel, and code compliance is demonstrated, then we let it be. So I think we really ought to focus on as long as the CLT process is viable and demonstrates itself with its, whatever its CC&Rs are, its homeowner occupation rules, as long as it complies with stuff we can regulate, then that's where I think we really put our intelligence on this.
Would those tend to, well, I'm guessing to your point about them coming in and out, if they are mobile, I would think it's not easy to hook it up and settle it in. So it's not like pulling in and out of an RV park. It's a project.
It's not as easy as hooking it up and driving it away, because they are skirted, and they are typically at least blocked. They have a foundation of some kind. It's taken off its wheels, and often the wheels are taken off in order to help with the skirting. It's a difficult process to move a tiny house, and it's uncommon that you do. Maybe a few times in a tiny house's life is it really moved, typically.
Is there a modular foundation out there for those?
Foundation usually requires earth removal, and there are, I guess you would call modular forms for foundations, but typically foundations are just built in place. Maybe helical piles, something more like what you're thinking, but ultimately it would be site-specific foundation pretty much no matter what. You'd have to have someone build it, but with a tiny house, it's a fairly simple foundation. I mean, even if it were a full stem wall, it would just be 20 feet, 8 feet, 20 feet, 8 feet, So the foundations are fairly inexpensive and easy to install for a foundation.
You said that the average size, the biggest is what? You said 30 by 10?
I think 30. I think I may have heard of mobile homes getting up to 40.
Yeah.
But that's with a big moving permit, and it's not typical for
Are
tiny
most of what
houses.
you're familiar with from a construction standpoint in that neighborhood of size? Or they
Under 30, always. Yeah.
So what's a small, what's
a
the
small
range?
tiny house would be 18 feet. A large one would be 30.
30,
Yeah.
okay. So 180 to 300 square feet.
Yeah.
As compared to an ADU, junior ADUs are less than 500 square feet, and those are increasingly popular because they're less regulated than full-sized ADUs. An ADU law provides for, I don't know what the minimums are for ADUs. I don't think there must be, but maybe there isn't. I don't
Yeah,
recall,
I can't
Up to
remember either right
1,200.
now.
Huh? There's
Up to 1,200.
up to 12, but I wonder if
Yeah, I don't
is
know
there
if there's a minimum.
a low? I don't know if there's a low.
I don't think so.
So what I'm looking at here is I'm seeing 20 by 26, 16 by 28.
Those aren't tiny homes.
But then
Well,
they
they're
can,
calling themselves tiny homes.
They
A
are
tiny home, well,
I-
you
Just
get,
saying.
the definition of tiny home is pretty I think they're talking more mobile tiny homes.
Well, there's the formal like tiny house on wheels acronym, right? And
Yeah.
that's mostly what we're talking about. There are modular buildings, is probably what you're seeing, more directed toward like ADU, prefab ADU market, yeah.
Yeah, they define themselves, apparently according to the internet, for whatever that's worth, as 400 square feet or less.
That sounds accurate.
In whatever dimension.
Configuration, yeah.
Well, it's a good tangent to explore with, as we move forward, but.
Oh, I think it is lovely. Yeah, we do have a task at hand.
I
and we
learned
do.
more than I wanted to learn about tiny houses tonight, I'll tell you that.
Well, I'm hoping to learn more as we go through this process,
I think
but
they're cool.
please, yeah, please do come. We're very welcome.
Thank you.
Introduce yourself.
Thank you, commissioners and city planner. I'm Elizabeth Diane. People know me as Lisa. And I did not come prepared with anything to speak, but to start to dive into what all is happening, you know, with the adaptation, the housing elements. And so I also am aware of time, and we've been here for a while, and I just want to keep learning. But for now, I'll make a statement that as a sustainable building designer since 2004, I have seen a lot of really successful community programs that address the things that I see outlined here that have to do with affordable housing. And of course, you know, higher end housing is always going to be a thing. So, you know, that's already kind of built in and taken care of. My biggest concern has been density and overgrowth in this area because it's so unique, and understanding, of course, that, and I don't even understand right now if that's a part of what's built into what you're reviewing right now. But that has been a concern, but also affordable housing. I've seen, coming from Olympia, Washington, I've seen some very successful programs. My first project, when I started my design business, was some cottages for Habitat for Humanity, who did something called the Fairview Cottage Development. And it was a very low impact to the land. It was near some wetlands, beautiful maple and oak trees around, and some firs. And they clustered, and I did very small footprints. We did pin pile foundations for the design because we wanted natural migration of water, that kind of thing. It was very exciting to the communities, and I've been past the, you know, almost 20 years later, and it still looks great. It's, they're nicely arranged, and it's simple architecture, but it's pleasing, especially because they're not big garages. There's not like a bunch of cars parked in front. The parking is handled off to the side, and I've seen other tiny home projects up there as well that have helped greatly move the houseless population from tent cities into transitional housing by coordinating with the local community college trade program to build the tiny homes and really involve many, many facets of the community. So they transitioned through churches offering up their extra land in the beginning, and working together with communities that were, you know, really self-governing in a way that pleased the rest of the community. And it was highly successful. People got back on their feet, got their jobs, had connections with more community resources than they would have had being outcasts in their tent cities and trying to fend for themselves. So, I mean, just everything we're talking about here tonight in the tiny home movement, I met the woman who started it, Dee Williams, and I've seen it just have success after success. So I can speak to that from a personal standpoint. My particular interest is also in something that's new to the IRC, which is hemp lime construction. And I'm kind of curious, one question that can be addressed now or later is really in the design standards. I noticed there's the mountain, and I'm sorry, I haven't gotten into this enough to know the mountain village considerations, if that's exclusive to certain housing, if it would include something like lime plaster that's appropriately protected with overhangs and, maybe, a splash, stem wall on the foundation. But the thing that I love about hemp lime is its breathability, its solutions for the black mold issues that we have so prevalently around here. It's really fire resistant. I saw a huge torch with the fire department testing a 12-inch insulated, a wall without the plaster on it, just the hemp lime, at 3,000 degrees for about 20 minutes. It just kind of like the first maybe quarter inch of it was a little bit degraded, but it will not ignite. It's breathable. It moderates interior air humidity, and it's natural, non-toxic. It's extremely fast growing. If it wouldn't burn. I mean, obviously, if you don't fireproof the roof and the overhangs and anything else, then something might ignite, of course. But, just from an ecological standpoint, you don't have as much toxins going up into the air. I mean, I could go on and on about it. But it's now in the IRC. And so I'd love to just see, and when I say it's in the IRC, it's approved to go in this year. And so
The
it's an
IRC.
addendum at this point, the International Residential Code. Yeah. And so I see people kind of grassroots now looking at all these solutions for home ownership and the environment that we have right now and finding solutions like, for example, hemp lime is something that you can have hired labor do it, or you can have, your friends come over and like a barn raising, it's easy to learn. I went to workshops in Ashland and learned in a week we had the majority of a 3,000 square foot structure done with a crew. Let's see, what do we have? About 12 people that were trained that week. There's just a lot of options that could come with this. So back to kind of like my original thought was, would that fit well with
Would our objective
This
design standards
object-
allow that?
Yeah.
Yeah, materiality in the aspirational statement and in the 1850040 building type standards, A1, which is Mountain Village Design Considerations, says historic construction materials in mountain communities are generally a mix of locally available materials, indigenous, the idea is indigenous look and feel for a material that is typically wood or stone or material fabricated to look and feel like wood or stone.
Mm-hmm.
So, short answer is yes. By my interpretation, staff would say, you give me something that looks and feels like a wood or stone material, a cementitious kind of product, we would.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the lime plaster it's stone material, just kind of ground up.
Yeah.
in
Does it look like
a different
stucco?
form. It really does. Yeah.
Cool.
It's super strong and so.
Yeah.
Okay, I really appreciate your
Yeah.
time. I'm excited about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your input and that idea that, more choices. Do we have somebody else who wants to come and chat with us?
I wasn't here to hear Evan, so I don't know how much, I'm Catherine Preuss, part of the Street Housing Alliance. And
There you go. Yeah, you can adjust
did
that.
you hear that?
Yeah.
So I didn't get here in time to hear Evan, so I'm not going to really talk much, but I just want to say we have some brochures that explain briefly the Community Land Trust concept, if you're not familiar with it. And if we could also send you information on the Community Land Trust concept, as well as the tiny house concept. Also, one of the things that the Residential Community Land Trust does is it it creates the permanently affordable housing and locks in any subsidy that doesn't have to be repeated once it's locked in and created. Unlike a lot of, the government-sponsored affordable housing, you have to keep putting in again and again and again to keep it going. So that's one thing that is really important, we think. Just want to mention that.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, the brochures? You can go ahead and set them over, and we'll share them. That'd be great, thank you. And then we'd like to also have, digital copies that are available that we can share with our next packet, that Jeff can distribute to the public also as part of our
Thank you.
deal. Okay, so this looks like the public has had enough, has contributed to our workshop. I think we have some things to sort out. Maybe let's go through. Anybody have any questions, any opinions? I don't know if we're going to have to, we don't have to decide tonight. The action can come later. I guess let me give you the framework. So potentially tonight was our workshop, and then we can make some changes, suggestions now, and then next meeting have a public hearing around our design standards and maybe get it ready to send to council if people feel like they're ready to go. I think we have some decisions to make around, do we want to recommend pursuing tiny homes and community land trusts? Do we want to discuss the duplex, triplex review process? And anything else that you feel like we need to pin down. We don't have to pin that all down tonight, but it probably does need to get pinned down. So go ahead, Patty, if you have thoughts.
I think it sounds great.
We have to get the mic so we can hear, so folks can hear you.
I think it sounds great, the tiny house thing, for the most part. I respect everybody's opinions, but yeah, I think it's worth pursuing.
Okay, great. Yeah. Okay. David?
No, I think we just focus on the objective design standards and come to the other things at a later date. Personally, I don't think they need to be intertwined into objective design standards.
I think you were thinking that it's a separate task to pursue a code.
But I think it detracts, like it did tonight, from focusing on polishing the objective design standards.
Right. I think, to your point, we haven't spent that much time. And I don't know, we really haven't gotten any public comment on, well, do you like it? Do you think it would look good? We haven't gotten much of that. So
I think with the way I'm interpreting the choice before you with respect to the tiny home initiative would be to authorize staff, or to recommend staff, not authorize staff, but recommend staff pursue tiny home legislation, but not necessarily to conflate it with objective design standards. I think Commissioner McDowell's right, that they're feeling more separate, and to distract at this moment might not be the best idea, but I want to make sure that if we've got a new housing typology and a new CLT form of legal ownership or organization behind it, that we're cognizant of it and its impacts to potential new legislation here. Not that it would supplant any effort. I don't mean to, or even to confuse, co-locate these within one code. I don't mean that. If it's of interest to you, I could pursue this with them, and sometime after objective design standards, it's built in tandem or rather concurrently with, we could come back on the heels of objective design standards and entertain this housing typology as a workshop, not instead of.
I think that's a good point, not to have them on the same night.
Yeah.
Like, wrap this up. and not discuss tiny houses or land, community land
So
trusts.
they can have their own meeting, so to speak, you know, after we're finished with the objective design.
Yeah, that's my insight, recommendation.
Okay, does that
Yeah.
fit with your,
Mhm.
and so yes to pursuing tiny homes after?
Well, I think it's not really I think that's more the call of city council.
Well, we can recommend. We absolutely can recommend. That is our job, that we can do that. And we say, we think this is important, we'd like to pursue it.
If where we head with this is, and I think it will, is that it's going to modify Title 18, then it is your purview. I would recommend that as a form of land development on private property, that it fold into Title 18, much like objective design standards. So you would have a tiny home code. By comparison, parking as well. Parking is now in Title 15, which is the building code chapter, which doesn't really make sense. It should be within Title 18 because it's more of a land use, not a building use. My point is, code auditing is on my council directive to look at and overhaul the general plan, and this all housing element, this all folds in very nicely with council direction, and I would have no problem going to city manager and council to convey your advisement that staff be tasked with pursuing, this code, so.
So, yes,
Nothing more.
okay, Vaughn?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Nothing.
No comments? Did you, and in terms of direction to staff, would you agree that, to pursue tiny home after
Yes.
we're done with objective design standards?
Yes, I'll move.
And perhaps we'll chew on the duplex, triplex thing until next time? Does that work for
Yeah.
everybody?
I get it.
Okay,
I made that note here.
okay, Tucson?
No, I don't have any further comments on this.
Okay, so, there's not a lot of real change we've come up with, other than we're going to decide about little things. This is kind of, which implies to me this is ready to go, and we are ready for a public hearing next month.
I could summarize what I heard, not now, but after I go through all my notes. I've kept careful notes, and I can make sure that over the next few days, while it's fresh, that this gets back to you to give you, the next iteration of this public review draft. And I think if we could work, independently, without violating Brown Act, that we're making sure that this is a fluid conversation on content before the next public hearing, so that whatever changes get publicized in advance of the next public hearing, that it's iterative in the direction that you intended tonight. And if there's questions that come up, then we can bring those up on the record, and we can even change it on the fly, enter it into the record the night of. And if it's substantive enough, then we would postpone the hearing by another 30 days, and that's an option too. So
I do feel like, just in case a project came up, it'd be nice to be ready for it, which is a reason to keep moving, in my opinion.
Yep.
On this. Okay. All right, then with that, you have what you need? We're set?
Yep,
I'm
I
ready
do.
to move on to our next item, which is commission and staff comments. Jeff, do you have anything for us?
I have nothing at this point, other than on the development review side of things, the Eugene Sway project up, next to the Mountain Medics building up there, that has resurfaced. Eugene has updated his project description and his illustrations and wishes to proceed with CEQA. So he has yet to submit a complete application. He does have an incomplete application submitted, which is nothing new. You've seen it all. His presentation before my arrival with, the subterranean structure and all that, that remains unchanged. There's a little bit of narrative that has changed, and that information I have put into the form of an RFP for CEQA work. That is in review internally, and if deemed complete by staff, that application, that narrative would go out for an RFP for 30 days for CEQA. And you would likely see that in a public hearing. If he gets back to me this month, it's possible that you could see it in probably not August, but September.
See which part?
You would see his application in a concept review. You would see, we would do a check-in on CEQA. So by then our 30-day RFP would potentially have cycled through. We might have, proposals in by then. We may or may not have selected. But we would have a definitive decision made on the CEQA document and process, enough for you to just get a briefing. Yeah. But CEQA will take months on that kind of project, and there's lots of work to be done. So this is a timely but time-consuming effort, for sure. Anyway, that's all I've got.
Okay. Tucson?
I've been a little bit out of the loop on what's happening with the landing and the proposed sale. Could you give a little update
thank
on
you.
that?
We do brief council from time to time. Todd has been doing that. And Melanie was with us at an event a while back. There was a public presentation or a stakeholders group, if you will, of interested folks that met on site earlier this week or last week. The grant, that is all centered on grant funding. It's the resiliency grant through the APA. The status of that simply is that green infrastructure and fire resilience and infrastructure sustainability, site sustainability on a comprehensive scale and focus is the thrust of that grant, but it is a big number. It's up to $20 million that would go toward green infrastructure if awarded. There are some stipulations that we need to be shovel ready by the time that's within a certain period of time that's issued. So we get the grant within 2 years. We need to complete the work. And to be clear, it is very much sustainable site metrics. It's not development. It's not buildings. It's not other than, parks and recreation related pathways, remediated water bodies, that kind of thing. But because the site's sealed, because EPA has essentially certified it as a clean site, all of the green infrastructure improvements would not trigger any more EPA compliance issues. So that's done. Parallel to that, the letter of interest that was negotiated between council and a developer is simply that. It's an indication of interest on the part of city and developer to pursue discussions, ultimately leading to the potential to enter into an agreement to develop the site. There are CEQA compliance issues, of course. There are Surplus Lands Act issues, which says that any holding by public entity needs to be made available for housing or parks and recreation development for underserved communities. There are exemptions to Surplus Lands Act for housing projects, for example. It is in draft amendment right now, that Surplus Lands Act legislation. So staff are tracking that, the implication of that, the results of that, and we'll report back to council, and I'll report to you as things get more specific.
So there's not a specific type of development other than some housing?
There have been some very concept level bubble diagram land use arrangements which are interesting from a type and quantity perspective. That is the type of land use and the quantity of that land use, the number of square footage of or acreage of development. I still think there are some site realities, infrastructure, capped areas of the site which would exempt housing, compaction conditions which need to be reconciled with those land use diagrams. So there's a lot more due diligence to ensure that the bubbles are buildable. That's the short answer. But suffice to say that it's a mixed-use project. The diagrams that I've seen range from, as I think I pointed out earlier, the land use on the site is close to 70% non-residential, and close to half green space. So I think that for the sake of just conversation and contemplation, that those are rough numbers that you'll probably see refined, but I'll bet that they're going to come in from a land use perspective pretty similar to those numbers. Predominantly open space, predominantly commercial, with some residential on the east side of the boulevard. Maybe, and a big maybe, some mixed use on the west side.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Vaughn?
No,
David?
Who's one asked? He covered it.
There you go. Patty? Okay, nothing here. Future agenda items besides objective design standards and tiny
None for me.
houses? Okey doke. Item 9 is to adjourn our July 16th, 2024, regular planning commission meeting.